I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh. It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello, and this is the Hormone Genius Podcast. I am here with my co-host, Jamie Rocci. This is Teresa Kenny, and we are happy to have you back on the Hormone Genius Podcast. And we are doing a special episode today, and this is going to be more philosophical in some ways, but also getting to the root of why we make decisions around habits, around hunger, around how we eat. And we're going to dig into how, as women in particular, we can navigate strategies to help us not feel that our decisions are kind of, we're enslaved to them in a sense. We're making decisions that we feel we do out of freedom, and also that we have control over our bodies and have a sense of peace around that too. And Jamie's going to really help us lead this discussion. She's been doing a lot of research on this, and she loves to talk about things related to kind of why we do the things that we do. And I'm excited that this is going to be something that we're doing in approach of the new year. And I know as I say this, some of you might have some triggers, because I do. When we talk about New Year's resolutions, sometimes it feels like this overwhelming thing, like, oh my gosh, I have to change my entire life, or I'm going to have to give up all pleasure and all happiness, because in order to live a healthy life, that's no fun. At least that's sometimes how I feel. Jamie. So yeah, let's get started.
Yes, I'm excited for this one. You know, when I was a graduate student, I think about it a lot. As I was getting my master's, I remember a session, we were sitting down and the professor was talking, and she's just sharing that there is so much more to hunger than our physical hunger, that there is a psychology to hunger. And it just hit me. And I think probably it was because it was following a pretty, I don't know, I'm not going to call it a severe eating disorder, but I mean, to me, it was interruptive, and it was a bigger part of my life when I was in college. And so, you know, since that time in my life, you know, anytime I think about eating or diet culture or hunger, it just means something different to me than it might otherwise. So I think about it a lot, just like you said, too, as we approach the new year. I always just, get a little nervous anytime friends or family say they're going on a diet or they're going to change everything, like you said, about the way they live or about the way they eat, because, you know, there's so much more, like I said, than just the physical effects of hunger. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. There is a psychological side, and we're going to dig into the science behind, again, the true physical hunger. And then also, like I said, what's behind it? Like, what's the emotion that sometimes takes place when we think about food? What are the triggers that sometimes leave us hungry, even though we don't need food? So again, this episode is for the woman who feels shame, who feels embarrassment, who's frustrated with food. We understand, again, just like Teresa said, this time can be very triggering in the new year, where everyone's talking about working out and reading right or eating right. And so again, we want to make sure that we're really talking to that woman who just can't quite get that relationship with food in a place that feels peaceful to her. So Teresa, we're just going to dig in. We're going to talk about first, just what is hunger? So the physical signs of hunger. We're going to start with the biology of it. So again, we know we've talked about this in episodes before, Teresa. I think we talked about this in our body image episode, but there's the ghrelin and leptin. These are two hormones that are created in our body that cue us when we're hungry and when we're full. So ghrelin is our hunger hormone. And ghrelin, it causes those hunger pangs. It's caused by the contracting of our stomach when it's empty. And again, it's our body's way of catching our attention to tell us to eat food. And ghrelin is made in the stomach, and it acts on the cells in our brain, again, to give us those hunger cues. So there's ghrelin. And then there's also leptin. So leptin tells us that we're full. So leptin is actually produced from fat cells, and it suppresses hunger by acting on certain cells in the brain. So it's interesting because as people gain body fat, the body can become resistant to leptin. So if we secrete a large amount over a long period of time, so if we're eating, and we're ignoring the hunger cues, and we constantly are eating and we're ignoring that our body is feeling full, then our cells can become resistant to that feeling. So, we talk about like PCOS and insulin resistance. So there's more ways that our cells can be resistant than just to insulin, for instance. It can be resistant to leptin. So again, that's why women can have a hard time losing weight because they're not feeling the cue. They're not feeling full because they're ignoring that cue. They're eating past full. So let's just kind of start there. Teresa, I am sure that you have felt this way. And as the holidays are coming up, where we're with family and the food on the table and on the counters looks so good, and we want to eat the brownies and the cookies and the sandwiches and all of that. Would you say that's a hard thing for you? And how has that changed throughout, your young life and moving into those wisdom years? What have you learned about hunger cues in your own life, especially during the holidays?
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like I'm blessed in some ways that, I haven't struggled with my weight as much as some other people have. So, and I think genetics are a gift. We can be blessed with sometimes good genes and sometimes genes that make it harder. But I think about this, Jamie, as something where, I'm seeking out like a pleasure, like a happiness. And a lot of times, food, because it feels good and at a very kind of like physical, very bare emotional level, like it gives us a sense of pleasure, we can oftentimes feel like we're going to miss out on something happy if we don't take part in it. Right. So if I'm sitting there and I'm looking at all of the foods that I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks amazing. And I can't forget, I love my grandma's, cinnamon rolls, and I love this. And I'm almost like fearful I'm going to miss out. And therefore, I think I end up overeating or indulging on things because of the fear of not gaining that happiness from it. And it's a very, I think, psychological, but also pure physiological mechanism, because we obviously had to survive through eating, and our bodies were meant to desire to stay alive. And so those cues, those hormones that we signal really are to keep us alive. But we're now in a situation where we don't have food scarcity. In fact, we have the exact opposite. We have food abundance. And therefore, we have to control, our behaviors in such a more deliberate way, because it's not a situation of, oh my gosh, I got to eat, because if I don't, I'm not going to live. It's like, I have to eat, but I have to do this in a way that, make sure that I stay healthy in my body and not become unhealthy.
Absolutely. And if we think about survival, I love thinking about this thought of, if I'm feeling hungry, is it possible I'm just tired? Because just like you said, like with survival times, if I am, living in the woods and I need to, survive, I could be tired. And if the things that give me the most energy are the things that are carbs, sugary, I'm going to grab for the fruit. I'm going to know that that's going to give me fast energy quick because of the sugar. So sometimes even in my head, I'm thinking, am I just tired? And is it my body's way to wake me up for quick energy? Or do I just need a nap? Do I just need to sleep? So our body, there's such an intelligence to our body that we can know, oh gosh, I want that sugary treat because I'm actually tired. Just take a nap instead. So I think that's really interesting and important to bring that up. But yeah, I know for me, I feel there are so many times, even like beyond just the holidays, where there's a yummy treat where I still want to have something sweet at the end of a meal. Like maybe I eat a full meal. There's no way I am hungry. It's not the holidays. I'm not with family. I'm just by myself. Why is it that I still want something sweet? Maybe I'm not tired. Maybe I am. But either way, like, what is that for? And so that's really what I want to dig in today. There is like this emotional tie to our hunger, and a lot of it has to do with undealt traumas at times for some women. It could be dealt with triggers. If we use food as a way to self-soothe, if we've ever done that in our past, our brain wants to feel comfortable again. It wants to feel safe. And so if food has become like a self-soothing or self-medicating tool, our body is going to want to continue to look for that because it wants to feel good and comfortable. But before we get into that, and again, this proves the point so well. So again, we talk about the physical hunger. We have our leptin, we have our ghrelin. We have the phenomenon where we're with family and it's holidays and we want to have our grandma's apple pie. Even though we're not hungry, we want to enjoy that. That's all well and good. But then we think about the New Year's and we think about why is it so difficult to stick with these resolutions, even though, we know what it means in our mind to eat well and healthy. Why is it so hard for us to do that? And it's proven by a couple studies I'm gonna share here. So the University of Scranton study, there was a study by the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that while about 45% of Americans usually make New Year's resolutions, only about 8% are successful in achieving them. So again, we can think in our mind, these people know how to eat well. They know how that they're going to maybe, reduce sugar or exercise more or whatever that New Year's resolution is. But what's keeping them from doing that? And again, it's this emotional, psychological hunger that we're going to, again, really dig into. Another study conducted, it's called the Statistical Brain Research Institute. They conducted a New Year's resolution statistics survey revealing that, again, only about 9.2% of people felt that they were successful in achieving their resolutions. And they said the reason why they couldn't actually fulfill their resolution, Teresa, was lack of willpower. Maybe setting some unrealistic goals, not setting up enough time, lack of support, and maybe setting too many goals and unclear goals. So again, there's the goal aspect, but then there's also just this underlying willpower that sometimes just can't carry through. And so again, that's really where now we're going to start digging into the psychological connection to food. So how does that sound, Teresa?
Yeah, that sounds good. Jamie, I'm really fascinated by this one particular author. His name is Arthur Brooks. He wrote a book called The Art of Happiness, and he's written several more. But I was listening to him on one of my also favorite podcasts called The Drive with Peter Attia. And I encourage you to look up this. It's one of the most recent ones he did with Arthur Brooks. And he talks about how our limbic system, which is, the raw emotions that we experience, and they are our survival emotions as well. But they often kind of we can become beholden to those in a sense. Like we let the limbic system basically choose our life for us. And it makes sense to me from a psychological perspective. We could easily be duped that the limbic system should help us make our decisions. But here's the key. And this is, I think all of us know this. People who live their life by just doing what always feels good, many times become train wrecks, right? Mm-hmm. I think of like the 60s and Woodstock and everybody just being like, whatever, like do it if it feels good. And in the moment, sure, it feels good. And our bodies from a very bare emotional limbic system, which is just those raw kind of things that tell us what to do. It feels good, but it doesn't always mean it's the right good thing for us. Right. And so I think of what he was talking about was that we need to become almost like the CEO of our own bodies. Like we need to be able to know that decisions around everything shouldn't just be decisions around, oh, this just feels good, so I should do it. What actually is healthy and good is the right thing. So what is good, true, and beautiful, many times it really is the right thing. And CEOs don't always, they make decisions that are the right thing, not what just feels good for a company to be successful. So I like this idea of thinking like we don't want to let just those raw kind of like survival hormones, emotions control our behaviors. We want to be have kind of like power over them, or discipline would probably be a better word, discipline over them. And he talked about like, I think this is just a great exercise. So I think I might try it. And my birthday is not for a while, but on your birthday, like actually write out what you feel almost like you're attached to, like too much, and it might for you're talking about sugar. Sugar, I think, is a very common attachment for people. They're like, I just have to eat chocolate every day. If I don't get chocolate, it's almost like I can't be happy,
Yeah.
So any attachment, I mean, for me, I feel like red wine is an attachment, like these things that almost like feel like they almost control us. We don't control them. We don't have a discipline over them. And then he said, write those things down and then just cross them out, literally just cross them out, almost like saying, I won't let those things be the things that I think make me truly happy. Those things are physical. They give a response, a quick response, but they aren't truly what make me healthy and happy overall. Right. And I thought, that's a good thing. Like, what are we attached to that we feel like we don't have a discipline over? And then how can we realize that there's a deeper thing going on? We don't want just that limbic system to control our behaviors, that we want to be the CEO of our own body and be able to make those decisions freely. And to do that probably takes a lot of cognitive work, I would think, Jamie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the thing that's the most frustrating for me is just this thought of, even though I think about this all the time, even though we know, like, let's say, Teresa, with your example of the unhealthy attachment to red wine, even though, Teresa, we know that, like, let's say red wine every night isn't healthy for our hormones, but we have this unhealthy attachment, right? You said, okay, just using this as an example, or any example that any of our listeners can think of. Think about whatever your unhealthy attachment is. We can think, where did that unhealthy attachment start? It has a beginning. And I think that's why this can be such a trouble for people when they're trying to lose weight or when they're trying to get their body image in order. It's because there was a beginning point. There was a starting point, And so that's something too that I want our listeners to understand. Is the thing you're feeling true hunger? Or is it psychological? If it's psychological, often it's fast acting and impulsive. It's usually connected to certain events, like you said, a habit. So maybe every time, you get your pajamas on, I'm just imagining, every time we put our pajamas on, okay, now that's my time for red wine. Okay, so it's a habit psychologically that's connected to a specific event or a certain emotion. Maybe I had a really hard day with the kids and I'm stressed out. And every time I feel that way, I want to make myself feel better. So there are these, these attachments, like you're saying, but the attachment starts somewhere, and that psychological connection, it's so complex and it runs deep. And if it's something that's so unhealthy, because we're smart women, like people listening to this podcast, we're smart. Like we might know, okay, this unhealthy connection to alcohol or to chocolate or cookies, like we can know in our heart, like what is teetering into unhealthy land. So if that's the case and our willpower alone is not getting to the heart of it, that means that there needs to be some deeper work that takes place in that arena. And I believe there was likely a tipping point in our life that led us to that behavior. So for example, when I was in college, we shared this earlier, like we said in this episode about the body image episode, but both Teresa and I struggled with like eating issues, disorders, dysmorphia, that sort of thing. And so in college, I remember feeling so depressed. So I would feel depressed. First, that depression, that root thought was, I'm worthless, I'm ugly, I don't feel good about myself. And then those negative thoughts would lead me to feeling depressed. And then I would reach for food and I would just gorge myself. I was not hungry at all, Teresa. I could have just eaten supper and I just gorged myself. And that gorging happened in relationship to the root thoughts of I'm worthless. So what happened was I had to first understand, where is that root thought coming from and why do I feel this way? And then the second thought was having to, again, find my support team, because it required counseling. So that's the main goal. If you're finding that you have an unhealthy connection and you want to sever it, it's more than just saying, oh, for New Year's this year, I'm going to eat better and drink more water and exercise. No, it could, for your New Year's resolution for weight loss, or even just a healthy, like I said, body image, it could be, let's get to the root of this connection. When did this begin? And maybe we can navigate that. And seeing a counselor or a therapist might be a really good place to start. And Teresa, I think it's often an overlooked place that many women don't even know to start there.
Yeah, I think I totally resonate with you, Jamie. Thinking about my own experience with body image, I felt like I didn't measure up to the girl next door, like that social comparison also, which this has only gotten worse since, they talk about social media probably being the biggest driver of unhappiness in younger women, particularly. And I dealt with that social comparison without social media, and it was still really hard and drove me to a body image disordered eating patterns. But now think about these young women who are dealing with social comparison on steroids. Yeah. And so I heard, again, Arthur Brooks say this: social comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. Like women, I think this must just be the nature of women. I'm sure, Jamie, and you probably could think of some good, metaphors for this, but what is it about women in particular that almost desire not just to be loved, but to be revered in their body, to be seen in their body as beautiful, and women do, they innately have this beauty. This is why, we don't paint a lot of nude men,
right.
There's definitely an attraction to the woman's body that is just different. And I think because of that, women desire that need to be seen in their body and to be seen as beautiful. And then when we get all this negative kind of like energy going on, and I think it can spiral us, like you said, it becomes a point where, oh my gosh, am I beautiful? Right. Do I see the beauty and value of my own body? And if I don't, then where do I fill up that loss? It's a loss that I have. It's like something that needs to be filled. And then I go for the easiest thing to go for. I really do feel like it's food that instantly gives you this quick gratification, especially sugar. And it says, oh, that felt good for a moment. But yet it leads to just a sadness. My daughter, all of us, I think, struggle with some level of this, but my daughter, my oldest daughter was telling me that, she struggles sometimes with just that kind of binge eating where you just you feel like you're just filling up an emotional hole. Yeah. And she goes, I think it's probably similar to the way men struggle with pornography. Sometimes it's like all day you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I going to eat today? Like, am I going to get a treat today? Like, what is going to be my treat? I can see this in myself. I especially used to do this. Like, I love Snickers bar. Like, when am I going to get my Snickers bar? Am I going to drive through and get a McFlurry at McDonald's? Because I love McFlurries. You almost can let your whole world be, kind of navigated by your desire to get that treat. But then, I think this is a great way to think of it. Men out there who are listening, I think pornography is very similar. It's kind of like in the back of their mind, they're like, if it's something they've done before and it felt good, it's like it's there and you're seeking to fill that void, that hole. But guess what? Just like food is instant and then makes you feel kind of bad. Yeah. So does pornography. It's like this high you get and then instantly you feel shameful. And I think, we need to understand as women how hard that is for men. If you can understand as a woman how it feels to eat a quart of ice cream and then feel shame, then we need to also understand for men, because they're different and wired a different way, that they feel like that same sort of thing. And they're also trying to fill up this void, this true God-given hole, like you talk about, Jamie, this desire to be seen, to be loved, to be known. It's true to all humans, but I think for men and women, it's expressed a little differently because of how we're made.
Teresa, I've never thought of it that way. Your oldest daughter, that is so wise of her to draw that connection, because it's true. I mean, it's hard for us women to relate to men, but just by bringing that connection on the forefront, that even helps me think, oh my gosh, yes. Because it's true. I know what that feels like. You know what it feels like, just thinking, oh, what am I going to eat next? Or I'm going to try not to eat at this time, but then I'm going to eat this time. And it becomes all consuming. And I remember in college, that was the case. It really was all consuming. And praise God, I don't have those issues nearly as much anymore. But the good news is that there is healing from that. And I think it's just, again, being so self-aware, exactly what we're talking about here, and knowing that, certain foods can act literally like, it's like it activates the reward center in the mind. So, and what else does that? Drugs, pornography, just like you said. So that's how it can be so addictive, is because of dopamine. Dopamine is that addictive neurotransmitter. So just knowing that the power food has over us, what do we want to give control to? Do we want to give control to the food, or do we have control? I think even reframing it in that way and saying, I'm going to be the one making this choice. This thought isn't going to make the choice over me. I'm going to make the thought over this choice. So I'd say the first thing we can do about it is being aware. Let's be aware of, where is this coming from? Is it coming from being tired? Is it coming from actually being hungry? Is it coming from, associating with memory? Is it coming from trying to self-soothe because something isn't feeling good in our life right now? Where is this hunger coming from? And so I say that is one thing we can do to kind of help ourselves navigate this.
Yeah. And I think we have to also find, something to replace that dopamine in a positive way. And because I'll go back to kind of where we are, they've done studies, and particularly since the 1980s and 90s, like our happiness, like people report their happiness is less, right? And no one knows for sure, but you speculate, is it social media? Is it chaos in the world? Whatnot? But I want to focus on this, Jamie, because I really think we're at a pivotal moment in our culture where we truly do need to kind of like reset and strive for happiness. And I don't mean that on a very fluffy emotional level. I really do mean it on a deeper level. And what gives people happiness is relationship. And I think you've talked about this a lot. What they know about, when you are able to sit in front of a person, literally sit in front of them, be, body to body, and gaze into people's eyes, and then be able to touch a human being in front of you. That is probably one of the most powerful kind of tools of relationship happiness building that anybody will ever have. We know that. I mean, as women, we know that bonding with our babies, we know that bonding with our own mothers and feeling that warmth and security that we get, but that's a hormonal response. Right. And I really want, if you're hearing me out there, we're in a world where you've been pulled away from that, whether it be that you were told you can work from home now and you don't have to be body to body with people. In your relationships with your friends, you're communicating more via social media than you are body to body in person with people. But I want human beings to know that in order for us to truly be happy, we have to have physical connection, and we have to be able to gaze into each other's eyes and be able to, touch each other in a way that says, I'm in communion with you. Mm-hmm. And that fills the deepest holes in our heart, is that type of building of relationship. And we need to get back to a sense of family. And it doesn't mean it has to always be biological, but it has to be a sense of like, I know who my people are and I know I can commune with my people. And I just think that's so important. And I want everyone to think about, like, am I isolated? You know, where can I become less isolated? Where can I start to really physically get more interaction with people in person? And I think this will help restore our culture in a time when we've been told out of fear, you know, these fear kind of emotions that tells us, you know, oh, you're supposed to be, you're supposed to stay away. That's safer. And it's not safer, because ultimately isolation is just as damaging as anything, you know. It leads to just a depression in people. So we've got to, I think, fill those voids that we're, you know, self-soothing with food and hunger and all those things that you're talking about, Jamie, with physical people.
Yeah, I agree. And it's that comfort, you know, we think about comfort food. We can think about like the comfort of others and helping fill that hole, like you said. And again, it is just the main goal of this episode in my heart is, if food has become so hard for you, to start thinking about why that is the case. And like you're saying, Teresa, there is this like hole, and community can help fill it. But it's also too just like a distorted view of self. Like, I know, like when I was struggling with food, I also hated myself at that time. So I didn't like myself. I hated myself. I felt like it was disgusting. No, I mean, terrible, self-deprecating all the time. And so really then if we think about the root of that, we think about, well, how do we restore that with ourselves? And one of the tips I want to give to our listeners is thinking about, how do we talk to ourselves on a day-to-day basis? But then also we talk a lot about how, you know, we can lose trust with others, or how it's difficult to be trusting, but sometimes we forget about the relationship and the trust we have with ourselves. And so we can break trust with ourselves, just like someone can break trust with us, or we can break trust with someone. We can break trust with ourselves. And when we break trust with ourselves, well, guess what that means? It means that there's healing that needs to take place. So we can think about every other time that I had a goal, or I wanted to do something well. I wanted to drink more water, exercise, eat well, and I didn't. Well, then now I set out a goal. I didn't do it. I lose a little bit of trust with myself. So then that gives me the belief that I can't do things that I tell myself. So now what happens is that can seep into many areas of life. So I think a really key part is being in community with others, but also to restore trust with thyself. Trust with thyself. When I say that, I just mean, again, carrying through with the little things. And so a good thing, an easy way to start doing this, if you guys are all thinking in your head, you're wanting to maybe lose weight or really get in shape this New Year's, first start with asking yourself, do you trust yourself? In what ways have you set out a goal that you weren't able to accomplish? And that's okay. In what ways can you this year create a goal that you can accomplish? And often that starts off with something easy, a quick win. First, you want to reestablish trust with self. And then second, think more about all the details of the foods and the order of foods and what you should have, what you shouldn't have, all that. But again, the key is thinking about what's causing that emotional trigger, that need to eat, that hunger, that psychological hunger. But then second, what is that relationship with self? And small habits could be, this morning, I'm going to wake up when my alarm goes off. And that's my thing, because normally I want to and I don't. So every morning I remind myself I can't do the small thing that I told myself I would do. That affects so much more than you even realize. So starting small, what's one small thing that you can start restoring trust with self? And then you can trust yourself with bigger things.
So Jamie, you know, I always want to make sure that we leave practical tips, like actual next steps that people can do in relationship to hunger and how we can navigate this kind of emotional connection we have to food. What are the practical steps that you advise, like, that women could start to think about as they're, you know, diving into this content?
Yeah, totally. Well, first and foremost, we want to be aware. We want to ask ourselves, are we actually hungry? And if we're not actually hungry, but we still crave food, take note of why that might be the case. Think about patterns that you're noticing. Secondly is be aware where you're at in your cycle, for heaven's sakes. So you're going to be hungrier after you ovulate. And sometimes, even for me, I'm thinking, gosh, I'm a lot hungrier than I was a week ago. I wonder what's going on. But because I have a history of thinking about this a lot, I then ask myself, okay, well, where am I at in my cycle? Is it like biologically normal that I'm hungrier now? And if the answer is yes, like definitely don't ignore your hunger cues. That means I need to eat. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, avoid restrictive diets. Avoid restrictive diets. Think about what foods you can eat and that are healthy and nourishing to your body, and not about the things you can't. So please do that. Again, that kind of ties to the very beginning of our episode where we talked about how only 9% of people actually can do these, New Year's resolutions diets. It's because restrictive diets really don't work well, especially if we have a history of eating disorders or any, brain food connection thoughts that aren't positive. Okay. And then we want to drink more water. So tactically, drinking more water actually brings us in to our parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. What does that do? It brings down our cortisol. It brings down our stress. So if our stress is decreased, likely we won't be triggered to grab for the sweet treat. So just drink water. It keeps us full. It's healthy, but it also, again, brings us into a rest and digest state that often is why that hunger might be coming up anyway. Maybe we're stressed, so we're hungry. Drink water first, and then ask yourself if you're hungry. And then again, 2 more things. Make sure that you're adding protein and fiber to your diet. Sometimes we are hungry because we just aren't fueling our body with the right things. So high protein, high fiber, start there. And then last but not least, think about how you talk to yourself, like we were saying before. How do you talk to yourself? Do you trust yourself? And start with little simple steps that can help you increase that trust with yourself, so that then when you do try to maybe go a little bit further with healthier eating and healthier habits, that you can stick with them more successfully.
Thanks, Jamie. Those are great.
We hope this all gave you a good perspective, maybe a different perspective on the New Year's. We also, too, want to share before we exit the talk today, our podcast, is that Teresa and I have some really exciting, fun news for 2024. Speaking of a new year. So Teresa and I are going to be hosting a live 3-session book study over Teresa's book, The Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole. And we want to invite all of you. So it's $27. You get in live 3 sessions, and you don't just get the convo points. I mean, we're going to talk about the book. Teresa's going to be going over the highlights of her books, but you are going to leave with discussion questions and topics of conversation if you are wanting to lead a book study in your community over Teresa's book. So you'll be getting emails from us, but you'll also find more information in the show notes below. Teresa, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I'm excited. I think, this can be another way that we can have a movement of making women the genius of their own hormones. So join us for this live book study. I'm excited to talk about it with you. And I'm really excited for 2024, Jamie. And I just always appreciate that you're continuing along this journey with me. It's been so much fun.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.